Right, this is video number 3 in the engine rebuild of the A35 engine. As I said in the first video, this is a 998 Morris Minor engine. It came out of a 1962 Moggy Thou. So I'm just about to put the main bearing shells in. So for those of you who don't know much about it, these are the shells, and these shells are 10 under, sorry, the cranks being reground, as I said on the last video. So basically every shell has got a little notch on it. It's got a little lip on it there, as you can see. It's cut into the shell, and that's to ensure that you get the shells the right way around. And on the back of the shell it'll be stamped the sizing. You can't see it on this camera, but I can assure you that the shells are all stamped on the back with the size of the shells you're putting in. So to begin with, I'll just show you how we go about putting these in. You line up the little notch on the shell. They're fairly easy to put in. Just make sure that that little notch is lined up. There's a notch on the block that you can see just there. That little notch there. So you're lining the back of the shell with that little notch, and we'll start at this end, and you just put that little notch lined up there. As you can see, it's just lined up nicely with that little cutout in the block, and then you just press that shell in. Just press it in with your thumb, and it'll go seat nicely in there, and that's it. Give it a press down at the bottom, make sure that it's located correctly, and that's in there. That shell's in there. Proceed with the next shell, just exactly the same. Every shell's got that little notch on, so it doesn't matter which way around you've got them, as long as that notch matches up with the recess in the block. So there's the next one, and so we're just going to line that up there. Make sure it's lined up with the little notch. Doesn't take an awful lot to push them in, and then just press it in with your finger, and then give it a press down, and you'll feel it or hear it clicking. You'll know it's in. You don't need to do any more than that. Try and keep everything clean. Try not to scratch these shells, because they're only very, very soft metal. So there's the other notch, look, you can just see it there. You can just see the little notch there. I'm afraid my camera work's not brilliant, but again, you just press it, line it up with the little recess there. Look, you can see there's a recess in the block. Line that shell up with that little recess. It's difficult working with one hand, but just bear with me. Line that up, and then all you've got to do is press it in with your thumb. Press it down with your thumb. Don't knock them in with a hammer or anything like that. Press it down and it'll go in. Like so. That one's just a little bit. That needs to go down just a tad, that. So let me just see. That's it. It's gone right in now. So they're all in. They fit fairly snug up to the top of the block. They're all fitted fairly snug up to the top. That one just needs another notch, but don't worry, because it will actually tap in when you put the cap. When you put the cap on it, it'll just push it down. But if you're not 100% sure, get yourself a little tiny tap. Not very much, just a really, really tiny little tap, and you'll feel it. It can't go anywhere else because it's lined up with the recess. That's it now. You haven't done any damage to the edge or anything, because you're just tapping it very gently. You might not need to do that. I'm working with one hand, so I'm holding the camera, so it does make it a little bit difficult. Then I use this as an assembly grease. It's very, very good. You don't need much of it. it is quite expensive. You might want to buy a full tub, I don't know. I just buy it as I need it, and it's done me well. So basically all you're doing then is you're just squirting a bit of this assembly lube onto each bearing, and all that does, that just gives it a little bit of an initial lubrication when you're starting up. These are not racing car engines, so don't think, oh, I've got to blather loads of grease on. You don't. It'll just end up costing you a fortune. It'll burn off and it'll just be in the oil that you're going to change after a couple of 100 miles anyway. But these bearings, you need to give them just a good smear like that. You've got to do both sides really. So I just work on like one packet to do me mains and shells and conrods and everything like that. So that's the first part of the job. Now again, I'm working with one hand, so you have to bear with me, but we get the crank, which is quite heavy. You'll be working, when you're doing it, with two hands, and you just nicely drop your crank into the bearings and just give it a spin to make sure it's turning, which it is. So we know that's not too bad. Now just bear with me now, because I'm going to take the crank out, because there's another little job that I've got to do, which is the thrust washers on that side. Now the thrust washers stop the end float, but what you need to do is just put a little bit of that grease on that end, and a little bit of grease on that end. And what that bit of grease will do, it'll hold your thrust washers in place. And believe me, you don't want them falling out while you're assembling it. And you'll see that there's two little grooves in the thrust washer. That's to allow the oil to float between the end of the crankshaft. So the flat end, they're also marked with the size. These are standard thrust washers. And you just press that in there, and that'll stick there with the grease. You don't need to worry about it, because it'll just stick in place. If you didn't have that grease there, and these are the ones that's just a half moon, as you can see. You'll see the ones that go on the top of the crank, they've got a different shape to them. But that little groove there will just ensure that the oil supplies the crank. And then I'll go back to what I should have done. And that's your crank in place. You'll see those thrust washers just down there, look. If you turn it, you can see them just moving a little bit. Don't worry about that, because they're just for the end float. Now what you need to do, what I generally do, I generally just put a bit of oil on the end of the crank, on the journals, rather than the shells, because it helps them stick. So just rub a bit of your assembly grease on there. And then you'll get your bearing cap, which is here. Which is your bearing cap. You then get your other side of your shell. And again, it's difficult with one hand, but you're just pressing that into the recess. There's a groove ready for it on the cap there. There's a groove there for it already. just press it into place. And it's in. Now I've already put some lube on there. If you want belt and braces, you can just give it another little squirt. You have to excuse me, it isn't easy with one hand. But then all I'm trying to show you is that it's not a difficult job. And then you get your bearing cap. These bearing caps have got little locating dowels. There's one there, look. And under the bearing cap there's a little recess, and that locating goes in there. Give your little cap a tap down with the hammer. Make sure it's all well located. And then if you just give it a little turn, your crank will still turn, look. So you know it's not binding, and that will tighten down obviously when you put the bolts in. I never tighten them down straight away. What I do is put all the bolts in like so, and don't ever put a spanner on a nut that you can't fasten up first with your fingers. You'll find that if you can do that, you won't end up stripping threads out. So if you've never done anything like this before, don't tighten your nuts up with a spanner. If it gets tight, it's because there's something stopping it from going down. Usually muck in the holes, things like that. So always tighten them down with your fingers first. If it'll go down there easy enough, then you've got no worries. And now I'm doing a little bit of ambidextrous, look, because I'm actually left-handed, so bear with me. So that's got too tight for me to tighten with my fingers now. So that's the first cap. And we'll tighten those up again in a short while. So now we'll come on to the next cap, and we do exactly the same. We find the recess in the shell, and there's also a recess in the cap. And then we just press the cap in. We press it into the cap. It's quite difficult for me, I'm afraid, with just one hand. So let me just pause this video for a moment and I'll show you them both completed. Right, I've got both the caps done now. The centre cap is the one, once again, it's got the thrust washers on it. On these thrust washers, I've got a little tab on them like that. You can't get them wrong because these ones go on the top. And again, you put the groove side to the outside, because that's what's got to touch the that's what's going on to the camshaft. It's running inside your camshaft. So just put a bit of grease on the back so it sticks it down. And that middle cap just fits on there like so. And again, you might have to just give it a tap down with the hammer. Just to get it located. Give it a little tap, make sure it's in. And it sits into those little dowels. Don't forget about your bolts. Tighten them up with your fingers first. If they are a little bit on the tight side, just squirt a bit of oil down. Like so. because if you've cleaned everything, everything's going to be a bit dry. But you don't need to copper grease them or anything like that, because they want to be in and they don't want to be coming out. So obviously tighten them up as far as you can with your fingers. You know that the thing's located, and just to make sure, you can give it a little turn. You know that it's turning. And the same with the last cap. Same, it's just got a bit of assembly lube on it. Locate it. Give it a little tap. Finger tight up. Finger tighten them up. And then we'll torque them down to the required torque, which, if I remember, is, come back to you with that one, I think it's 30 pounds, I think, or 30, I can't remember, so I'm going to get the book out and have a look. But there we go, just tighten them all finger tight. Don't do anything, as I said. It's very important, that, because it might not seem important right now, but if you've got everything right, you can virtually tighten everything up with your fingers. It saves you raving about with spanners, and then you can just finish them off with a spanner. You know everything's located. Those two little nuts that you can see there and there, I'll leave them on simply because they're for the filter, the wire mesh filter that goes in. And rather than lose them, I just leave them screwed to the cap and then take them out when I want to put that on. But I'll come back to that in a minute. I'll just pause again for you, thanks. Right, this is just tightening them up so that I know that they're down. Not torqued up or anything like that. I just want to make sure that everything's down and tight, so that everything's located in its right area and right place. I'm not trying to guess the torques, I just want to make sure that everything's in place and that the crank turns, because it's no good just torquing one down and finding out, hey, oh, there's something wrong further down the line. So just give them a little tighten down like this, and I'm sure you guys will probably have your own method of doing it, but I just do it this way simply because you can always check on what's gone wrong if you do it like this. If you tighten one down fully torqued and then crank work turn later on down the line, you don't know which one you're not going to know which one you've tightened that's nipping the bearing. So, as I say, these are just there, and that crank, as you can see, it turns quite easily. So there's nothing really awry there. But if you do that at every stage, you're going to find out that things are going well, and you can just give it another nip round. And they'll all tighten up until they get where you need to put the torque on them. As I said, I'm just doing it this way so that you can see that there's nothing difficult about it. Take your time. I don't know what this has took me now, about 20 minutes probably. And the crank still turns. So hopefully I haven't bored you to death. There's not a lot to it, and hopefully you'll enjoy that part of it. If you've got any questions, message me, and if you like what you've seen so far, I know it's a bit amateurish, but if you like it and you want to have a go yourself, subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.